The kingdom of heaven is like a man who went out to sow seed, and his enemy came and planted weed. The kingdom of heaven is like a mustard tree, mustard seed, and it is like yeast. This is from the readings this morning. So welcome again to Mission Alive. Our reading today is about the kingdom, or often we now say the reign of God, where God reigns in people's lives. I remember once I was, of all places, I was in Thailand, in Bangkok, for a conference, and there was an Irishman there. And we had some great times telling stories, but he was asked to preach on the Feast of Christ the King. And he said in that sermon that for years the Feast of Christ the King meant nothing to him. Because for him as an Irishman, for many years growing up, the kingdom and the king was the British oppression of the Irish people. But he said, having lived a little bit at the time now in Thailand, I can appreciate a king because the king of Thailand had done much for his people and was much loved by his people. So Paddy came to a new understanding of Christ the King. So we have to ask ourselves, what do we mean by this reign of God? And what is the mission? Jesus' mission on earth was to proclaim the kingdom of God. And he gave us the mission to continue that. When I was in Papua New Guinea, I was involved with others to train teams of people to give a retreat, to go around to the villages and to give a retreat to the people. And one of the topics was the kingdom of God, the reign of God. And the short definition of it, which we taught, was the reign of God is anywhere where the love and the law of God is alive in people's lives, where the love and the law of God is in people's lives. This is very simple, but it contains a lot. And our mission is to continue to proclaim and establish the reign of God in people's lives. And that's why missionaries went out to do that. In our first reading, there's mention of the words justice, leniency, and kindly, to be kindly. These are aspects of this reign of God. This is aspects of God. This is how God is, and this is what we are called to be. A story I heard from Sister Simona, who worked with me, I mentioned her before. She was over 50 years on the mission. She was up for many years up in the mountains of the Papuan region. And she said there was one incident where a lady gave birth to twins. And one of those twins was going to be killed, as that was their custom. And I think it probably has some reason for it in terms of, can a woman in those circumstances care for two children? And also if there was an attack on the village, the men would stand and defend, and the women would gather the children and head off into the bush. And it would be very hard for a woman to handle two children in that circumstance. So whatever the reason, culturally, the child was going to be killed, until one young woman ran in amongst all the men and everybody and grabbed the child and ran off to the mission and brought the child to the sisters, who then looked after it and raised the child. This is just a very practical example of how the kingdom, the reign of God, is established in people's lives by doing something, by a very dramatic event. Also, in places like Papua New Guinea, the colonial government, the Australian government before, used to go out into areas where there was no government control and established government posts and established the law. And so people would come under the government rule. Now, you might think this is strange, but in a sense, a lot of government, for all its faults, is based on Christian principles, which is what has happened coming out of Europe, where Christian principles were established. So in law, there is a law, you obey the law. There is a law, there is justice, there are courts, there are ways of defining who is at fault and what is the punishment should be. So the Australian patrol officers went in, they stopped the killing, often stopped the tribal wars, although they still continue. They stopped cannibalism, they stopped headhunting, and many of these things, and brought people under the law. So with government and education and the work of the missions, the different churches, people were taught a new way of life and a new value for life. And so the reign of God is being established. It's not something that will ever happen completely, and we all know that there are many, many things still wrong. Many times government is not right, many times the church has done wrong. So it's not perfect, but that is the mission, to more and more establish the reign of God, that God reigns in our life. The law and the love of God is paramount in our life, and we establish that. And again, for all of us, we do that firstly by establishing that in our own lives. And it's an ongoing process. And we help others to come to that also, that the love of God is paramount in people's lives. And we follow the law of God, which is to love one another. So the mission is there for all of us. It's out there beyond in other cultures and for other people. It is here around the corner and down the street for us. Have a great Sunday on mission.